Hello and welcome to the Southbound Sports Show. I'm your host, Richie Leahy, here with my co-host, Maddie B. And football season is officially kicking off. I know seems like it's a little bit early this year. We have media days to talk about. They started to do some camp type stuff. A lot of players are kind of holding out, saying they're not going to show up until they get that new contract like Jordan Love. But I know you guys, Matt, started practice. You want to give us a rundown?
Yeah, it was kind of crazy when I was looking at the schedule, but for our youth program this year, we're starting practice this week, and for our third and fourth and fifth and sixth graders, this is their heat acclimation. So trying to get ready to get accustomed to being out in the heat, and then the following week they get to go full pad and get into the flow of things, where with us we're just flags, so we can just go right off the smack, and we're in it. So this week's kind of unique because we have, with the first graders, they've never played football before, and we don't know who can do what. So this is almost like for lack of a better word, like a skills competition to kind of get a feel for who are our skill guys, who are our linemen, just to try to identify some of those kids. And I think for the linemen in particular, it's kind of a break because we just do it in rotations. Like they have 3 different stations that they rotate through. And so everyone gets to be a lineman, everyone gets to be a receiver, a quarterback, a running back, and just it's kind of crazy because we have like 35 kids on our flag team in first and second grade, and we have more kids in flag than we do on our varsity team at this point. So I'm happy with the numbers, but it also creates a challenge because the way our league's set up, each kid's supposed to get at least 4 plays. And so when you have 2 20-minute running quarters, like there's times where if you have one group of kids that are playing, they may get 4 plays in, and that eats up like a chunk of time that there's the like half the game or a quarter of the game right there in one drive. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge to try to fit everybody on the field at different times. So good problem to have, but excited to be back.
Yeah, that's cool. How's the weather up there? I know we've been getting rain, and I've been worried that the show might get knocked out because of the internet, but um, it's been like a rough week. So you guys getting good weather? Or is it too hot up there still?
Well, for the most part, it's been scorching here. Um, I actually was, as we were setting up our drills for practice, I was looking and the grass is like dead on our practice field, and we share the field with the varsity. And I thought, oh God, this is going to be a problem because normally for this time of year, you want the grass to be in pristine condition, and I try to be really picky with what sections we're using with our flag kids because I don't want to tear it up for our varsity kids. And it's like by the end of camp, if we're not careful, it's going to be one giant dust bowl.
That's where you need to start telling me, like, hey, I started to take up groundskeeping, and you just become the groundskeeper out there, and then you don't even have to be at home. You can be away from home, like even more.
I'll
Like,
give
sorry,
credit.
I gotta go water some grass.
Well, I'm going to give credit where credit's due. The both coaches that I worked for down south, they knew so much about grass and watering schedules and field maintenance. I learned so much that I forgot the majority of it because I was like, I'm never going to need to know this. And the one coach was just like, I know that the custodial staff isn't going to do it the way I want it done, so I'm just doing it. I come up here myself and have the watering schedule and everything else and maintain the fields.
I joke, but a buddy of mine, we used to help the baseball coach at high school with our field because we knew, like, yo, if you're not doing certain things throughout the day, then like it's not going to be ready to go. And so like we wouldn't actually cut it and stuff, but we'd go out and put like feed down or whatever, and try to soak up some of the stuff and like turn over the ground like the dirt during the day. Like, hey, got to take a quick break from my class and go do some groundskeeping. like over lunch and stuff. So I know coaches can get into it because like you don't want like to ruin your day, and like I know the football runoff is tough because if it does get torn up, it doesn't grow back. Like
Well,
in Pennsylvania, it's just going to be mud, like you said the entire time.
and that's where when we have our debates over what's better, grass versus turf, that's why I tend to err on the side of turf, just from the logistical standpoint that you don't have to worry about watering schedules and stuff with turf, and it just seems to that once it's set and you have everything established, like you're not painting lines, you're not dealing with watering schedules, you're not dealing with grass cutting responsibility. Like it's a pretty streamlined process.
That's where I hear people. I know some people out west, and they have to water their grass or it dies, and it's like, why don't you just put in turf? Like your house would look awesome. Everyone else's looks like crap. And if you don't have that big of a yard anyway, because it's like you're living in the metro part anyway, they're all like little town areas or whatever with like small. Because like even down here, I looked in some of those where it's like, hey, here's your house. Oh, here's your backyard. And I could like lay down and touch the end of my like the fence and the sidewalk. So it's like, why don't you just put turf in? Because until you buy a mower and like mess around with it, and or even like you weed eater, like I don't even know what you would do on such a small plot of land. Like my studio here is bigger than what the land was for that grass. Just put some like good turf in, like with the rubber underneath, and then you wouldn't have to worry about it. It'd be awesome. Like that would be honestly my dream. Like if I had a dream of like a vacation home, it would be something like that where it's natural, like you're in the mountains or you're at the beach, but the grounds is just like artificial so that you don't have to mess with it, and you just show up every few months. It's like a tiny home type deal, and then you just go ahead and pressure wash like your house, clean it every once in a while, but you don't have to worry about paying someone to cut the grass or do anything like that. Like why? I mean, I was down here and I got pulled into like a convo on people watering their grass in their yard, and like they're saying that they wake up at 4 a.m. because if they water it later in the day, then you're gonna get some burn. And I was like, I put down different seed to try to like have grass that you don't have to water. Like the hardiest grass I could find is what I put down. Because like, bro, I'm not waking up at 4 a.m. I don't even want to get up at 4 a.m. to go to the bathroom if I wake up. I'm like, can I fall back asleep and not wet the bed? Like that's a dangerous game that I'm gonna play. I'm sure as hell not going outside and turning on the sprinkler and then moving it around for the rest of the morning. Not my move. So I give it up to the groundskeepers that are able to make that work because that's not on my schedule. But let's see. Anything else you want to talk about with your team?
Um, not necessarily. I just excited to get back in the flow. Like I was a little bit nervous today, just knowing that we have a lot of kids, and I have a couple of new coaches on staff because we're trying to do something different. Where last year everybody that was on staff were newer coaches, and I thought, well, next year I'm going to be moving up, and I thought it would be helpful that if I had some younger coaches that kind of baptize them into it so that when I move up I can hand it off and they already have a flow of how things operate. So that was one of the things that we were looking at doing and having some younger coaches, and it just seemed like it was a pretty streamlined process.
Yeah, that's cool. You have to keep us updated as you work your way through the season because you're doing both, right? You're doing youth and high school.
Yeah, I'm helping the high school as quarterback coach, and we actually had a 7-on-7 and big man challenge this past weekend, and our starting quarterback was out, and it was a different experience with our backups because they were really blank slates, and so it was different to just try to push, how to look at coverage, and I guess my views on it are a little bit different because I don't know necessarily the kids have to read specific or identify all of the specific coverages. I think it's easier to kind of just teach them really basics, like, is there one high safety or is there two high? If they can do that, then the only other question I have is who's the flat defender? And if they can identify that, then we're leaps and bounds ahead of the game, and it seems to help speed up the process of their learning. Because once they figure those two things out, then it's a matter of where's the open hole.
I thought you were going to say that you got to jump in, popped your shirt off like Jim Harbaugh, and you just ran quarterback drills. Let's say you should have sent me a picture of that, bro. Harbaugh has that picture of him with the shirt off catching that ball with his eyes closed, remember? People put that as a meme.
Like that's why I'm wearing glasses, because it damaged my retinas. You should tell your boy, get out in the sun a little bit. It's okay.
Bro, he's living his best life. He's in an RV down in San Diego. I'm assuming he's getting some sun down there, right?
Well, I haven't seen a recent photo, so maybe he's not even here anymore.
So I did see that everyone's buying. They say that they're buying in to his philosophy down at the Chargers, and now like everyone's really working out hard. And I was thinking, like, what were you doing before? Like that was your job. You're just like dogging it.
Yeah, they're just hanging out. I mean, you're in San Diego. It's a balmy 75 every day. They're just chilling.
But like these guys know that if they get the Super Bowl, they are pretty much like taken care of at some point for life. Because then the NFL is going to bring you back. They're going to do other things. If you're a guy that can get multiple Super Bowls, and this starts usually like at the quarterback level, like if Herbert can get a Super Bowl or two, then he gets legend status, and he's going to be in commercials. Like, heck, Dan Marino didn't even win a Super Bowl. He's in commercials. He's still in that old man commercial I keep seeing, they keep showing, where it's like the old guys are like trying their uniforms back on. It's like him, Emmett Smith, and like Jerry Rice. And I'm thinking, how many younger people even know who these guys are? Like, wasn't maybe Dan Marino if he was doing like NutriFit or whatever? But like, I'm sure a bunch of younger kids don't really know Emmett Smith. Like, where the hell are you going to see him? Unless the NFL's like promoting him. And the only way they're promoting him is because he has a bunch of Super Bowls and other records that they can point to. So like if you're a player, like I don't think just making the league, you're like, yeah, I'm here, chilling. Because like some guys, like they have to be working out hard. I think it was like maybe Cooper Kupp, how he was talking about like his only focus was just working out all the time. And especially like in high school, they were telling him like, yeah, you're not going to be good enough to play in college. Then he went to college and he said he would like wear ankle weights around. People thought he was like this weirdo guy, like always wearing like weighted stuff and like running from class to class and like doing all this extra stuff where he was just running sprints anywhere, anytime he could. And then finally, like even his coach is like, he said he overheard an eval where they're like, yeah, that guy's never going to play. Like, let's just get him in on special teams or somewhere. And then he's like, oh, screw you guys. I'm going to put in the extra work and I am going to play. And then he's like in the NFL and he's pretty productive. So it's like, you could work like that. But imagine if you already had the physical tools where you don't have to mess around with like ankle weights and things just to make progress. And then you could work out a little bit harder and be an all-time great. Or even like T.O., like awesome physical attributes that could do anything. And all he would have to do is just be cool in the locker room. And I love T.O., but they're like, my man, cool down. Like, when are you turning into the savvy vet where you're just the quiet Julio Franco type where people come in and they're like, hey, he's still here? Awesome. And he's like 90 years old. And they're like, hey, where'd Julio go? He's always been here. Like, that could have been T.O. I feel like he still could have played into his like 40s like Tom Brady. But because he was still doing like the media stunts, no team was going to touch that. So that's where I'm wondering like with some of these guys. Because like Devontae Adams, he's talking about bringing my man Tom Brady back this year. Did you hear that?
No.
He's saying that he's told Tom that they should figure out a way to get him to come back. That's who he wants to be the Raiders quarterback this year. He said he's all in on the Raiders. And he knows that the easiest way for them to get that Super Bowl is if they can talk Tom Brady out of retirement. And could you imagine that if he just comes back with the Raiders? You'd be wearing Raiders gear every week. You'd be like, bro, we're 10 wins already. Week 10. I got my Raiders gear on. We paint wearing like eye mask and all kind of like makeup stuff, like all maked up. I'm like, bro, you Raiders all the time now. Tom Brady, he shows up, turns the entire town around.
Although this you saying that has now made me need to backtrack for a sec, because now that I've actually had a minute to kind of breathe and actually think without having to focus on schoolwork this summer, I started reading more on Pirates. And so then the more that I was looking at it, was like, it matches up perfectly with coaching flag football, because who are the worst adults that you know? Pirates. Who are the worst kids that you know? First and second grade kids. So then the more that I started comparing the two, I'm like, who swears a lot? Pirates. Who else says a lot of crazy swearing and random things? First and second grade kids. So I was like, I'm actually running a pirate crew at this point. Maybe I just need an eye patch.
That is what you should get. You should just go in character all the time. That's like what Mike Leach was doing with his philosophy.
I appreciate Mike Leach even more now. I see the comparison. Like,
that's where I thought you were going with it. You're going to start being a Mike Leach disciple all the time.
I'm close. I just don't know that I can go completely all in.
That's what you need. I always wonder, like, if he would have stayed at Washington State, like, would he have gotten sick? I was thinking about that while I cut my grass the other day. I'm like randomly thinking of Mike Leach. Would Washington State have been left behind? Because when they were doing their media rights, could you imagine if they had Mike Leach there? He's a media draw. I'm sure they would have got more money just by keeping him. And instead he went to Mississippi State. And then they were picked to finish like what, third from last, maybe like next to last this year. And so it's like a little bit crazy that they can have, with the expanded SEC, so many teams come in, and now I think we're going to see a history switch, where even with the expanded playoffs, it's going to be tough for some of those middling teams, like in Mississippi State when Leach was there. Could they break through and make the playoffs? Maybe, but like they have to do good in the SEC for that to happen. And so I feel like if you're a Washington State,
consistently do well.
Yeah, well, even if you're just making it like once every, like let's say, even success, like you would want your team to make the playoffs once every, at least 5 years or so. Like if you're being realistic, there's going to be ebbs and flows where like Michigan made it 3 years in a row. If they missed this year, it'd be like, oh, bummer, but they just won the national championship. So like, you're not going to win it every year. But like some teams, it's like with Penn State, they haven't made it since it expanded. That's been a decade. You would think that they would have at least made it twice with as much as the talent that they've had. They should have at least made it twice in a decade. Like it doesn't matter if it's all lumped together. Like Michigan made it 3 times during that run, but they were all back to back to back. Like that's fine. I think on average, power programs should be making it twice. Like even Florida State, they should have made it twice, right? Last year, they shouldn't have got snubbed. Let's be real.
Yep.
They made it the first year with Jameis. That's kind of like what I think a team should shoot for. Like I'm not saying, oh, they need to make it every other year or every year. Like that's kind of insane. And maybe with the expanded playoffs, I'll increase that number to maybe like every 3 years or so, every other year, depending on how much talent you're bringing in. Because like if you're bringing in top 10 talent, like in Ohio State's bringing in top 5 talent every year, they should really make it every other year, at minimum. If they're not, then something's wrong. Because it's a 12-team playoff now. Like it's different if you're a top 10 team and you're making it every like 2 or 3 years, like that's fine. But some of the programs like Mississippi State, like you had a 0% chance to make it before. Now you're going to have, or you probably had like, to be realistic, you probably had like a 5% chance to make it. Because they were close in a couple of rankings and they just didn't have the depth to compete. But now they have to compete, and these other conferences are having easier times. where like Mississippi State might still have like a 5 or less chance to make it. If like Oklahoma State, all they have to do is win the Big 12. So their chances are much higher than they were in the old system. So I saw some polls come out. They were trying to aggregate like all the preseason predictors. And I think what they saw was the prediction is going to be Georgia number 1, Oregon 2, 3 was Utah, I believe, in the Big 12. And then they had Florida State at 4, which I was kind of surprised by that. Because in the predictor, you would think that the ACC would be a little bit ahead of the Big 12, just in terms of power programs, right? Because the ACC has recently won a couple national championships with multiple programs. So like
Yeah.
they had two different teams win the national championship. That's the same level the Big Ten is on right now, even with the new teams coming in. Like USC didn't win it, Washington didn't win, Oregon hasn't won it. So like there's no change. The Big Ten still has 2 teams, Michigan and Ohio State, that have won it in the playoff era. I would count Florida State in there because they won it the year before. So you have Florida State and Clemson. Big 12 has nobody. They don't even have a playoff win, right? Cincinnati is the only team that has made it in the new Big 12. Even if you throw in the old teams, Oklahoma and Texas, they don't have a playoff win. The Big 12 has never won. So like to have the preseason predictor be like, that's it, Utah, they're coming in, they're going to win the league, and they're going to be better than Florida State. Just off that strength is a little bit concerning to me because I just don't see it, to be honest. And we're just talking to the top 4 prediction. Like that's the way that's going to come in. I think the way it works is it's the 4 highest conference champs, right? And then they're going to take a 5th conference champ. They had the 5th as Liberty, I believe, which are they in Conference USA?
They're either Conference USA or A. I want to say Conference USA.
Or are they in the AAC or whatever now? There's been so many movements around. Like, I don't even know what the next conference would be. Because, like, they have kind of the Pac-2, but they're not going to automatically put Washington State or Oregon State in. Like, you have a better chance of, like, I think the poll that they had is, like...
They are Conference USA.
Yeah, so it's going to be them, maybe Coastal, Carolina, Tulane, or... Some had Boise State on the list as teams that could steal that last spot. And I thought that was a pretty good list. The middle teams were Ohio State.
You were saying, hold on a sec. You were saying about Washington State, and I think like Part A, if had Leach not have left, like I think maybe they would have still maintained a level of performance. But I think you take it a step further, and then when Leach left for Mississippi State, because sometimes just a change of scenery is what you need. Like your message dries up, the kids aren't responding. I thought that they made a positive move and hired Rolovich from Hawaii. And so they went from air raid to run and shoot. They were still going passing offense to passing offense. And I thought that would have been a good move, that they were going to maintain that similar style of play. And they forced him out because of the COVID restrictions, and now they're having to deal with that ongoing lawsuit. So I mean, like they took a bad situation, just kept making it worse and worse as a university, because now they're going to have to deal with the legal ramifications of firing them, you know, as more research has come out from the pandemic.
Yeah, that's where I do wonder for some of those schools if they regret some of the decisions. Because like some of them, even going back in time when they were trying to add Texas and Oklahoma, if the Pac-12 had just voted yes and added Texas, Texas Tech, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State, the Pac-12 would still be around. Like that, when A&M went to the SEC, and at the same time Pac-12 had been working, they were trying to get Texas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and I think Oklahoma State was the 4th, even though they weren't really sold on them. So they were trying to get like a Kansas type. A&M wanted to break away from Texas. They jumped to the SEC. and Texas tried to backfill with Texas Tech, and they were like, "There's no way we're taking Texas Tech and Oklahoma State." Like, I wonder if the presidents, they're probably, I don't even know, they're probably not the same presidents at the time at that time that are there now. But I wonder if they ever just wonder and think like, damn, I wish I would have voted to allow that to happen. Because then they would have been a 16-team conference. They kind of would have been locked in. I don't think Texas would have wanted to run to the SEC because you get the West Coast recruiting, and you get to keep owning Texas, and you get the academics that you want. So that conference wouldn't have broken up at all. If anything, you probably would have just seen a Big Ten Pac-12 merger. Pac-16, it would have been like the first 32-team major conference, which I don't even think they would have merged. They would have just kept that alliance thing that they tried to do. But it didn't make sense when there was like 3 conferences, because how are you going to schedule 3 conferences in an alliance? That doesn't make any sense. But if it was a 2-team partnership where the championship was the Rose Bowl, people would have been eating that up. And all it took was one president vote of them being like, no, we don't want Texas Tech or Oklahoma State, and that killed it. Like, to those Washington State presidents, like, they're fans and alums, that they used to be like, we're way above those programs. Now you're not. Now you're in the garbage, buddy. Like, you might think that you can get it, but the conferences don't even want you. Like, the Mountain West or whatever, like, they don't want your schools because they don't know. The Big 12 didn't want you. That's what I keep hearing, where it's like, well, right now the Big 12 is at, what, 16, I think? They're trying to grab Florida State and Clemson because of the uncertainty with the ACC media days, which we'll get to in a second here. But someone was saying that they should just grab Washington State and Oregon State at that time and try to really get into a 20-team conference. And I'm like, why? The SEC has what, 16? The Big Ten has 18. Why would you want to go to 20? Unless you're just trying to prevent the backfill from people, like teams getting stolen. Because like I could see some really dumb moves happening where, like, if Clemson and Florida State join the Big 12, what if West Virginia just left and they went to be rivals with Pitt in the ACC? I really think their admin would be happy with that. I think their fans would hate it. Some of them would love it though, because they're back with Pitt, they're back with West Virginia, they're back with Virginia Tech, and they're back with Miami, and they're like, here we are, back to the Big East, baby, and they don't have to play Florida State or Clemson, so they could easily be on top. Because remember, they're still taking the top 4. So if West Virginia were to jump, it's the top of that conference becomes Miami, maybe. Virginia Tech hasn't been good. It could very easily just be West Virginia and Miami and go back to the Big East days of like 2000 or whatever. And then that would be it. Like Notre Dame's kind of there, but they don't get the bump of winning. The projections I didn't see. I don't think Notre Dame was in the projection. It was going to be Ohio State, I think Bama. Then they had Penn State. Then they had like Louisville, Ole Miss, or not Louisville, Ole Miss and LSU. They had Michigan, and then they had, I forget who the last team was. It was like another SEC team. It wasn't Clemson, which I was kind of surprised on. So they're really saying that the projections this year is going to be 4 Big Ten teams: Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan. The Florida State or the ACC champ, Utah or the Big 12 champ, Liberty or the other conference champ. And then the rest is going to be just like SEC backfill. Georgia, Bama, LSU, Texas. I think Texas was the other one I didn't mention. So they're probably the one that I missed. And then Ole Miss. And that's going to be like your playoff. So keep that in mind whenever these other conferences are saying like, hey, Notre Dame, you're not in a conference. Guess what? You're out, buddy. You're out. The Big Ten commissioner came out and said that the Big Ten, when they were doing their media negotiations, that they said that 44 out of the top 50 rated games last year were on regular TV, over the air. And so when they were doing their thing, they wanted to make sure that they focused on free games for people to watch. This year, the Big Ten has over 60 free over-the-air games scheduled, which I said is going to be awesome. And I think even ESPN's panicking because they made an announcement that they're going to be trying to get more SEC games on ABC. And so wait for like a weird 3-game block on ABC where it's like ABC at noon, ABC at 3:30, ABC at 7:30 or whatever to try to go up against the Big Ten, having just games all across the networks with like the bigger showdowns. And it's going to be easier with the Big Ten because they have more teams and it's nationwide. The ACC tried to bring that up at their conference thing where they were saying they're the only team that's in the most populous states or something. They said like New York and California now with their expansion, and Texas and Florida. And to be fair, they are. But that doesn't mean that people in those states are watching. Like, do people in New York watch Syracuse football? Hell no. They did that rating, that TV rating where it showed, and it was like the top 3 to watch teams in New York were Notre Dame, Michigan, and Ohio State. So Syracuse isn't getting them anything. But they're going to continue to fight against Florida State and Clemson. So I want to get your thoughts on that before I talk about what I've been hearing lately in that regard, Matt.
Well, just thinking, and I've read so much of which conference they're going to and the speculation, and more recently, as I'm looking at the different conference options for Florida State and Clemson, because I feel like those are the two that are primarily being focused on. I question, as you look at the ACC, and they're in that ESPN deal, but they're not getting the type of money that's being offered to the SEC schools. For them to take a jump to get out of their, like, say that they clear everything and their grant of rights, for them to go jump ship to go to the Big 12, unless there was some kind of special deal that Fox cuts with them, it's like you leave one bad situation to enter another. Because it's like, to get into the Big 12 at that point, you're not making the same type of money that you would in the Big 10. So why are you, like, you're leaving one deal where you're going to a second rate conference or second rate paying conference to another, and it just it doesn't make sense to force your way out. I think in a best case scenario, you bet on yourself if you don't have that offer on the table. But I feel like if Florida State were to enter the Big Ten, they would be one of the higher rated programs, and in terms of viewership and things like that, where, a school like Miami, they're hedging their bets on playing Florida State, playing Clemson, playing Notre Dame, and drawing. They're so far down. You can only sell, well, we were good in the 80s for so long before, they're like a Nebraska that's just fallen off of a program that used to be relevant.
So I've been following this pretty closely now, and I'll say that my opinion is I think the SEC is playing chicken. I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. So no one's going to think that Florida State's going to jump into the SEC and they're going to get that same money cut, because the SEC isn't making as much money as the Big Ten. So all the media articles that everyone's hearing and putting out there, it's coming from a lot of the ESPN reporters because they own the SEC. They don't want to pay the SEC rate for Florida State and Clemson. They also don't want to keep the pay the same, and then everyone else in that conference falls a little bit behind because they're in a tough situation. Because I've been saying all along, if Florida State goes into the SEC, ESPN says, hey guys, we're not increasing your money. And then now the Big Ten's making like 80 million to 100 million. And the SEC is like, well, we were going to be making 70 or whatever. And we don't even know what they're going to be making. They were making 50. So they're anticipating a jump. ESPN's not going to make them make that jump. So then they might be 30 million behind the Big Ten. What's to stop like I said before, A&M or Florida from making that jump. Because everything I've been hearing is the Big Ten knows that they have to expand into the South. They know they need to get into some of those recruiting hotbeds, not just for football, but for other sports as well, especially as they become like a nationwide conference. Like you're bringing in teams in California and stuff like that. They're traditionally good in all sports. Like you need to bring in other population heavy states in the South, get that recruiting ground. And if you're able to say, hey, A&M, we know you hate Texas, it's a real shame the SEC invited them without letting you guys know. Like, why don't you just come to the Big Ten? You'll make more money than them again. Might help with recruiting with NIL era. We're going to be offering like X amount of money to all athletes anyway. And it's going to be a pretty easy jump for them, I think. Same with like a Florida. Like, hey, they just invited Florida State. Like, that sucks for you guys. You want to come to the Big Ten? You're AAU. Like, let's get you in there and see what happens. Now, the more realistic approach for me is thinking that Florida State has to wait. I forget what the date is, if it's 2026 or 2027. But the ACC, they had a vote. This came up in the court case, which is why I'm bringing it up. They had a vote a few years ago, or I guess it might have been a while ago now, that they wanted to extend the grant of rights to ESPN for an additional 10 years. So the ACC conference brought this up in court, I think in North Carolina, and they were saying that Florida State voted for this, so they should be held into 2036. The court looked at the documents and they said that's wrong. They voted actually against it. So since the ACC's argument was that Florida State voted for it, meaning they should be held responsible, the court didn't see it that way, said no, they didn't. So there's a good chance that whenever this cycle ends in 2026 or 2027, that Florida State gets out scot-free. In that scenario, if the Big Ten doesn't extend an invite and the Big 12 saying like, hey, you can make an additional $15 million a year, I think they should take it. Because then you're still able to help elevate your college, your university. You're making more money. You get away from a toxic situation where the ACC is coming out and just dogging your program during their media days. And they can take Clemson with them, and they could really help facilitate the ACC kind of falling off. I think having that, I don't want to say backup conference, but having another nationwide conference that even though they're not making a lot of money, they still have historic programs in both basketball and football. Because I keep hearing different things of like, from Big 12 writers thinking that the Big 10 is still going to invite Kansas of all programs. It's like, why? They could have invited Kansas at any time. At any time they can get Kansas if they want them. Because no one wants them. Nobody wants them. There's an entire reason why everyone's picking apart the Big 12 and the Big 10's like, no, we're going to take USC and kill the Pac-12 instead and take Oregon and all them and not bring Kansas with them because they could very easily have brought Kansas with them when they did that and grabbed another like Iowa State or someone that's AAU. And it's like, why? Why do we want that? We can get you at any time. So just because a school's AAU doesn't mean they're going to get added into the Big Ten. I keep seeing people post these South Florida memes because South Florida is also in the AAU. They'll wait for Florida. Or, on the other hand, I was trying to look up the cycle. Florida State's been close. There's a very good chance that Florida State could get added in that next cycle, right? They don't have a fixed schedule for adding new teams, but the last time they added Miami, Notre Dame, South Florida, Cal Riverside, George Washington, and Arizona State. So the Big Ten could have very easily added Arizona State too, if they wanted to. And I think Arizona's in it anyway. They didn't, right? Just because a school is in that doesn't mean that they get added to the conference. But they did welcome the new members by saying that they brought in 4 AAU members that are going to be a great fit academically. And I feel like that was either a smokescreen or that was kind of a shot at Florida State and Clemson. Because what I've heard is Florida State's close, Clemson is not, to get added to that list. So you could see a split there where I'm still not sold on Clemson being invited. I've been saying that for so long, and I know Clemson guys hate it. because I hear about it all the time. I'm sorry. I think it would be better for the Big Ten if they're going to add programs that they would just add Florida State and Georgia Tech, or hell, the best would be Florida State and North Carolina, as I've said. Bring in the two best programs in all sports. That's Florida State and North Carolina, and you killed the ACC, just like they did for the Pac-12. Oregon might have been up there, but in all sports, it's pretty much UCLA and USC, right? Bring the top dogs in, and then the rest will be begging. And they even take a pay cut to get in, right? Clemson would take whatever scraps the Big Ten threw at them. Clemson would probably take a $40 million deal, because in the ACC they're making like what, 30? If they took Florida State and North Carolina at full price, they could nab Clemson at like 40 probably. They 100% would take it. And I'm not even being a jerk. Because the SEC is not going to grab them. They would be like in a limbo Washington State type Oregon State deal. Because if they go through the lawsuit and Florida State gets added to the Big Ten with North Carolina, Clemson's option is the Big 12 or what? Independent? How the hell are they going to schedule independent? They don't have a name, the draw. It's not like people even know where they are still. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, some people might get it from the South Carolina rivalry, but there's still a good lot of people that have no idea where Auburn is. Like having that location kind of helps, right? They don't have it. So those are my thoughts on Media Day. Oregon had a huge duck go down the river in Indianapolis, and I thought, what a great way to really just show your brand as like an over-the-top, like, hey, look at me. Look at me. Because you know they're going to be like talking about other schools. I already said that they had Oregon. So they had Oregon number one, and I think in the aggregate pool. The Big Ten Media Days had Ohio State winning. So in theirs, it would have been Ohio State getting the automatic bye, and then Oregon would have been the 5 seed or whatever. They'd be the next top seed. They had a couple first place votes. And then they had Penn State and Michigan. So the same top 4 that they hope the top 4 teams get into the playoffs. It's going to be the same 4 that they've been having, except Oregon is new. And I guess same 2, Michigan and Ohio State. And then Penn State's been right there knocking on the door. And then Oregon has been knocking on the door too. They've been missing both of those schools. Washington's fallen off. USC's fallen off. There are some other teams, like Penn State has one top game. And I'm saying this, I'm going to say it probably all weekend, Matt. If Penn State doesn't make the playoffs this year, they should fire Franklin.
Well, I will be shocked if they survive it.
Why?
I just don't think, I feel like they have a similar case of like the Pitt syndrome, that they'll just randomly lose games that they have no business losing.
They've been so close, and they've been losing to Ohio State and Michigan. And you're right, they throw in like a random Illinois, like overtime, like 18 2-point conversion loss, and you're like, what are you doing? Or like when Indiana, when Penix reached out and hit the pylon in like overtime or whatever, and they lost to him. And it's like, now with the expanded playoff, you're allowed to have a miss up or 2. They could probably be 10-2 and get in. They have to beat Ohio State, they could beat Ohio State and be the Big Ten champ this year. Their schedule is so weak. They don't play Oregon. They don't play Michigan. Their schedule comes down to just beating Ohio State. They could lose, and remember, we don't know the tie-breaking scenarios either. So they could lose to Ohio State and then have to play them again in a rematch for the Big Ten championship game because Oregon plays Ohio State. And so I don't know what happens like in that scenario. If Ohio State beats both Oregon and Penn State and they're tied at like 10-1 or whatever, 11-1 as like the next team up, who gets a rematch against Ohio State? Like, how does that work? Or what hell? You could even have a scenario. Oh no, Michigan plays Oregon. I was gonna say you could have a scenario where like, what if Michigan's also up there and they're all tied and they all lost to Ohio State? Like, who gets that rematch? Who gets the rubber match? Do they just give up and be like, we don't need to play this game actually? We'll show like a highlight of like last year's or like a montage instead. Because like that's a real thing that can happen with these giant conferences. You're going to get rematches, but with Penn State only having to play Ohio State, they could very easily lose to Ohio State. Ohio State plays Oregon again in the Big Ten championship as a rematch. Penn State's on the sideline at 11-1, and they're in the playoff. They get a home game because they won't get that extra loss from the Big Ten championship game, and they could be given a whiteout against like some random team from the South, like an Ole Miss, that they could absolutely beat. That's what I'm saying. They have to have progress this year because everyone keeps telling me like, oh, they lost like some top playmakers. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. At some point, you're the only team in the top of the Big Ten that has a quarterback returning. Everyone else has new quarterbacks. Quarterback is the most important position. 100%. Michigan and Ohio State have been putting way more players in the NFL every year than what Penn State's been putting in. Penn State should not be having a roster that's pretty depleted. They recruit basically at the same level as Michigan. Michigan's been putting like 10 dudes in the NFL every year. Penn State is nowhere near that. So how can Michigan lose 10 dudes a year and make the playoffs 3 years in a row, but Penn State can't sneak in the 1 year that they have the easiest schedule of all time in the Big Ten? I would say the easiest schedule of all time, but Rutgers, I don't think Rutgers plays any of the top teams. So Rutgers actually has the easiest schedule this year, and people are picking them to win like 4 games or whatever. I don't know what the Vegas line is, but if I were them, I'd be hammering that over. Because their game should all be a toss-up. It might be the most nerve-wracking year of gambling if you're betting on Rutgers and they end up going like 7-5 or whatever. And you're like, bro, one more win. But every year, it's not like, well, we got Ohio State this year. That's an instant loss. Like, they don't have any instant losses on their schedule. So if you want an easy, I don't say an easy bet, but if you want a bet that could be realistically go with the over, you can go with them. Or Michigan State's kind of the same way. I think they only have 2 or 3 instant losses. Everything else is a toss-up. So if they're picked to only win like 4 or 5 games, they could very easily beat that. Because all they have to do is beat the 3 cupcakes they schedule and then beat like an Indiana that they've been doing in the past, right? So why not? New coach. They don't have a scandal going on this year. I mean, maybe the roster's depleted, so they end up choking every game. But those easy schedules are going to be big. They're going to be key in the Big Ten, the expanded Big Ten, because what everyone's been joking about is that's like the new Big Ten West. Whoever gets the weakest schedule is just going to be the sacrifice against one of the top dogs in the Big Ten championship game. Like Rutgers will be there 11-1, and people will say, "Oh my God, it's Rutgers' year," and Ohio State will come out and bloodbath them 55-10 in the Big Ten championship game. They'll collect their trophy for playing in the Big Ten champ participant, and that will be it. They'll use it on the recruiting trail for next time. Because the way it works is every other year. So next year, Rutgers' schedule is going to be a disaster. Because I think the way they set up is a 4-year schedule. So like Michigan has a tough schedule this year. Next year, I don't think it'll be as bad. Then the following year, it's going to be another tough schedule. They just won't have Texas on it, right? So it's like, all right, if you can kind of team up or like schedule, because before they scheduled a non-conference, they didn't know what the Big Ten schedule was going to be, but now you can kind of guide it where it's like, all right, Rutgers knows they have an easy Big Ten schedule coming up. They could schedule an out of conference against like an LSU or someone, right? Where if they lose, it doesn't really matter, but it gets your team ready to play in the Big Ten because you're playing a top dog. And if they beat them, then they're on track for the playoffs as long as they don't blow it against some other team. That's what Penn State's at right now. They have West Virginia. They should kill them. I don't care what West Virginia's coach says. Like, Penn State should absolutely kill them. And last year they kept it close, and I was surprised that Penn State let them hang around. And then, of course, Penn State did their own, like losing to Michigan and Ohio State again. And they could have won both those games if you're being honest. I just don't know what the coaching situation is. So now Franklin has to make a jump. There's no excuses. If Penn State misses the playoffs again in an expanded playoff year with an easy schedule, I don't see how any Penn State fan can defend him. Like, he'll get it, boys. I mean, I guess, how many years was Jopa there? Till the 80s, right? He won his championships in the 80s, I think. So he was there 20 years before that. That'll be like Franklin. 2042, baby. Penn State will be there. Finally making the playoffs. Hear that lion roar on the TV the holiday weekend. That's my thing. Let's see what else. Any other college football stuff you want to talk about?
No.
I already talked about my NFL stuff with Tom Brady coming back. My man Amari Cooper, they're working on a new extension for him, or giving him a pay raise. I don't know how that's going to work out for me. I've been hearing bad things about Deshaun Watson, so I'm kind of worried that maybe that's not going to be a lock. But the Browns right now should be pretty loaded, if we're being honest. That Browns team, as long as Watson doesn't get injured again, it's going to be, people will consider it a surprise, but they should very easily compete, if not win the AFC North.
Well, they have a great backup.
Who'd they get?
Jameis.
Oh my gosh. Living in the past, bro. You're talking pre-college football playoffs. All I remember Jameis in the playoff era is that he dropped that fumble and let Oregon take it all the way to the house. I mean, a Big Ten member, Oregon. A fellow conference mate of mine. They could have kept Ohio State out. Could you imagine if Oregon would have won that game, how things would have been different? If Ohio State never won a championship under Urban Meyer and then Michigan won one with Harbaugh? Ryan Day, I don't know if you watched the press conference today. He looked like he was crying before it. Or it was either that or he hadn't slept in like 3 weeks because he had bags under his eyes. His face is always like red. So I don't know if it's like sunburnt or what. It's hard to get a read on him. He just sounded like he was depressed, talking about how they got a lot of guys back and their main focus is beating Michigan. But it is just another big game for them and how they run and just win it. And I'm like, you don't sound like you mean it, buddy. It's like he's like, he knows there's so much pressure on him, right? I just feel like there's going to be some coaching mistakes because you can't just have that much pressure on you. And then Michigan has a brand new coach that beat him last year. It's like, all right. He has no pressure on him, right? If Ohio State goes undefeated and loses to Michigan again, they kept showing the stat during his interview where he's 40-0 against everyone else in the Big Ten while they were Big Ten members, because I know he lost to Oregon too. The only team he's lost to is Michigan. So can you imagine that being your career? 40-0. He'd be what, 41-3 or 40-3? I don't know if they added the other, because he did beat Michigan the one time, his first year, I think. Yeah, with Don Brown. That was the year then he said he was going to hang 100 on Michigan, and Michigan got rid of Don Brown. So his entire career is like winning, but not when it matters. He's like a Peyton Manning of college coaches. And they're going to push him out, right? Because if he doesn't win this year, heck, he could beat Michigan. And if they get boat raced in the playoffs, with a loaded team like that, I don't see how they keep him. I mean, if he loses to Michigan, he has to win the national championship. I don't know if because even I want to say Pete Feinbaum, what's his name? Paul Feinbaum?
Yeah.
I think Harbaugh called him Pete. He made a joke today that Ryan Day's last time he got them to the playoffs, the national championship game, they only lost by 28. 28. If he loses to Michigan and loses by 28 to Georgia or something again, I don't see how you can be like, this guy has a loaded roster. He had a quarterback that would have been coming back. Instead, he pushed him out. He pushed the quarterback out, or boosters did, or something. Right? McCord's no longer there. They brought in a guy that I don't think is an upgrade. I could be wrong. It's not like when he brought in Fields, right? Where everyone was like, wow, Fields is really good. I'm surprised Georgia's not playing him. And then, now the Steelers have him. And they're saying that Fields is broken. Did you see the Steelers report? So they're saying that based on some of the internal scouting and stuff, they know he's a project, but he's been kind of written off where some of the coaches were saying that, like, if you watch his eyes, he's just like not even a deer in headlights where he's staring someone down. He's just looking like all over the place because he doesn't know what to do. Like, he's that broken. So they're thinking like there's no chance of him having an impact with the Steelers. That if it's going to be Russell Wilson or bust, which is kind of surprising, right? Because I thought he did pretty decent with the Bears. But I mean, once you get the yips, that's pretty much it. Chuck Knobloch style, right? Unless you're like even underhanding it to the guy. I don't know. That's what kind of worries me because it's like he was good. Steelers get him. I'm talking about the Browns being good, and now the Steelers have to deal with that. But what are they going to do? The other thing I had, it's not really related to that, but I don't want to forget it. The NCAA has their antitrust lawsuit stuff that's going on, which is part of the limits on like college athlete things, which is kind of like the payments, right? I think we'll finally get a number on that. So right now, they're trying to do it based on the ESPN article. They're trying to do it fair. So starting not this year, next financial year, I think would be in July. They can give up to $22 million to their athletes. It's supposed to rise based on revenue from the conferences, right? Which is where the recruiting is really going to shift. Because if the NCAA sets like a percentage based on revenue, and they're saying like you can pay 22 million plus 5% or something, they're going to just pay that to football players, right? Because why would you not? And if your conference is making $30 million more than the other conferences like the Big Ten is,
UConn might not.
Yeah, UConn might not, but they're not going to get the Big Ten money anyway. I'm saying like if the Big Ten's given a $30 million bump where it's based on percentage and they're making $30 million more than the other conferences starting next year, because we don't know what SEC's number is, so I'm going by the current number. Big Ten's supposed to be making like 80 to 100. I'm just going to go with the 80. SEC's still like 50 something. If the Big Ten's able to pay a percentage of that $30 million difference directly to football athletes, they're going to start recruiting a lot better depth. Even if Rutgers has more salary money for their roster than Alabama, they have to be pissed, right? Maybe the NCAA doesn't limit it, but based on what we've been hearing what I've been hearing is that they think there's going to be a limit based on conference revenue that's going to kind of tier it a little bit, but take away the scholarship limit. And some schools that are against that, right? Because they don't want to start paying players. And if you get rid of the scholarship limit and you're stuck paying you sign a contract with these guys for 4 years or whatever, which is what this new thing's going to be, you could be paying 200 players not to play, right? Like the Bobby Bonilla. And then what's it going to happen? Like, what's going to happen at that? Like, there has to be a limit. So that's what they're trying to figure out. They're trying to put a cap on the system, they said, and they want to monitor what schools are spending. So they're going to create a new reporting system. They think right now that they're going to land on a limit of 105 players, which is more than the current 85. Because you don't need a scholarship, right? So right now, I'll use Michigan as an example. So Juwan Howard had 2 sons play basketball, right? He could give them a scholarship, but basketball only has so many scholarships. If he decided that he wants his son to just play and he pays for him, because Michigan's paying him like millions of dollars or whatever, if he just pays for his son's tuition, he gets a free scholarship. That's why you see a lot of coaches that have their sons on their team, because that's just a free scholarship for someone else, right? That's where I think with football, now if there's no scholarships at all and you're just able to pay for whomever you want, and the limit's just like you can only pay 105 players, that's it. You're getting 20 of those players might have had academic scholarships. Michigan had some guys that played baseball, so they might have been using a baseball scholarship, right? It doesn't matter. However they're getting their scholarship, it counts against whatever their primary sport is. So if you're doing two or three, like if you're a great track athlete and you're also playing football, they can kind of finagle the system a little bit. Now with the paying, you're just going to get whatever you want. So that's going to be the wrap up. My final thing that I have, something else real quick. Ryan Day told his players to start playing the new college football game, so they can start to learn about their opponents. Matt, do you think that makes sense?
I mean, I think it does ish. I don't know.
Dude, if you're playing college football, it's better for younger kids to learn the game. You're not going to learn the tendencies of like your opponent playing college football. Like they're not that accurate. I already talked about the inaccuracies at just to Michigan alone last week. So,
but I feel like anything is better than nothing. And I had this conversation with someone recently where I feel like I try not to have the delusions of grandeur, but as I was going, like, thinking when I started with like youth sports, like I went into like football practice knowing what different routes are, and like could just say run a slant, run an out, run a post, run a corner, and like knew what those like some of those different routes were. And I feel like there's a lot of kids right now that are like up into high school that they have no idea. Like you say run a post and they're running the corner, or to say run the corner and they're running across the middle of the field, and it's like, what are you doing? Like you're not even close.
Shouldn't the coach be responsible for that, not video games?
But I feel like there was a certain level of like, even within the people that I grew up with, it you'd play backyard football and you could say, hey, run this route, and like people like you could kind of have some semblance of what people were running. It's like now it's just like everyone just goes deep.
Bro, you can just buy the football. It has the one that has the plays drawn right on the side, and then you can just show the guy what to do, or print your own wristband. I mean, I knew all the plays. I knew everything, but I played a lot of video games and I watched a lot of things. I think like a lot of kids growing up didn't have that, right? I think even today, kids don't play sports video games. I never hear kids talking about like Madden as much as we used to do, right? Or NCAA football. NCAA football is the first time that I've actually seen a lot of people talk about a college game. I think did I send you the numbers? So they had over 2 million people pre-order that game to play early. But I think that's a little bit dishonest because they're just going by the player count. Like I said, if you have Game Pass, you didn't have to pre-order it. So like my number was probably in that 2.2 million. I didn't pay the extra money for the deluxe because I knew it was going to be just for online digital cards. Did you try to play online?
Yeah.
Dude, it's like trying to fight someone underwater. Like, I don't know if it got any better, but I thought, you know what? I'm going to play a game. I want to see what this mode is. Pop it in. Played a guy from Clemson, or he was Clemson. I was Michigan, of course. I think it was just like whatever I don't think it was using the ultimate team. I think you're just picking your favorite team or something. Like, I don't think I got to pick my team. I think it's just set up as your favorite team. I could be wrong. And of course, I hadn't even played, like I've been playing at whatever, the freshman. So like, I guess you're playing as All-American or Heisman or something on there. So the kick bar is going fast. And I'm sitting there watching. And I'm like, all right, this is going to be good. Right in the middle, I press it. Half a second delay at least. And it's like going. And I was like, this is not going to be a good game. So I get the ball, or he got the ball first, I think. And you could just tell that anytime my guy tried to like make a move as playing linebacker, because I like to play linebacker and do a quarterback type spy, and because a lot of people just roll the quarterback out, so I'll just run him down. My guy was like, I would be hitting the stick to have a move, and he would just be delayed. Like it was almost unplayable. And this guy's just throwing the ball to nobody because like you could tell that his buttons weren't working either. Because the throwing is a quick time event. You have to hold the button in until the bar fills up. But you're letting it go, and the game thinks you're still holding it, and every throw's in the red. So the throws are just going, all over the place. And I'm like, this is awful. We're both throwing like 8 interceptions. And I thought, you know what? I'm just going to run the ball. Running is just as bad because like you can't make a cut. So all I started to do was just pound it up the middle and goal line. And the guy made no adjustments. He's still running his 4-3. So I'm just chipping away 6 yards, 6 yards, running the clock out, bro. It's like my old high school coach. He told us there was a team that was like just had a guy that was breaking records and they were scoring like a ton. And his pregame speech was, "Can't get blown out if we don't give them the ball." And we just ate clock the entire game. And so I thought, that's what I'm going to do in this game. I get down, I try to kick a field goal. It's 5 million yards to the right. My opponent, he gets down there finally, goes to kick his field goal from like the 5-yard line. I'm thinking I'm going to be up 6-3 at this point. His was even more of a miss. And I thought, this guy's probably at home crying, right? Because I'm just running the ball, running the clock out. I finally scored again to put it up 2 scores. And I was just like kneeling, and he rage quit. At the end, I won 12-0. Running the ball, baby, up the middle. And I thought, this is such an awful experience. I don't even know. Like, I was kind of excited that I won because I was just laughing that the game was so broken that you can just run up the middle and he can't tackle you or do anything. And I was just wondering, like, I wish he could call into the show because I want to hear what his thoughts were. He couldn't have enjoyed it, right? No one likes taking a pounding like that. Because like he had guys wide open because I was just like I just started at one point. I just started to do quarterback contain because he was trying to like just run his quarterback. And I thought, no, son, because I know you ain't passing the ball. And once I contained him, you could just tell he was doing nothing. He was like just throwing him, like trying to throw the ball away, throwing picks. And I had a feeling like this is like an adult playing this probably. And I didn't play another game after that. I thought I'll wait for the hype to die down. So was your experience the same or was it different?
It was kind of similar where it was glitchy and it felt like it was like I was seeing things that were like, oh, throw to this guy, and then be like, and it's gonna go clear over here. So
well, that's why I hate, like, it's hard to explain. I know it's not a good podcast to just talk about a game you played, but I'm trying to emphasize like how bad of an experience it was. It was kind of like, leave me alone. I have to run the ball up the middle 30 times to get to the next higher tier or whatever. And so I'm wondering, like, I'm going to let it go for a week or two. I'm going to come back and I'm going to try to just practice, I guess, on whatever difficulty it is. I'm guessing it's all American. I'm going to find that out. And then I'm going to play another game and I will report back to let you know. Because right now I'm 1-0. I'm undefeated. I couldn't bring myself to play another game. Like, it honestly sucked a lot of the joy out where it's like, all right, let's play Dynasty. But I'm not like in it. Like, I was honestly, when I was up, because I forget, I think one of the scores was a pick 6, if I'm remembering correctly now. Because it was like last Wednesday or Tuesday I played. And I guess it was Wednesday because we recorded the show on Tuesday. So I want to say that he threw a pick 6. And some of the times that was my best run because I'm like, if my guy can just outrun. Because I'm not joking, between the both of us, we probably had 8 interceptions. Like, it was just about, like, the entire game was around the 50-yard line of just interception, back to interception, back to interception. Until I think I ran one either close enough that I could run it in, or I took it to the house, I can't remember. And I missed the extra points, so it was 12-0. Because I couldn't kick worth a shit. It was so delayed. It's like a carnival game, right? Or that drunk driving simulator. It's almost what it was like. But that's all I have for this week. I did want to bring up one more thing because I keep hearing online chatter about how international basketball is so hard now, Matt, because every team in the world has NBA players like South Sudan. There's no way we should be almost losing to South Sudan. They had 2 players. I looked it up. I have it up right here. 2 players that played for at most 3 years in the league. Guys that you wouldn't even know. All right? The only notable guy is Luol Deng, is the assistant coach for their club. Like, that's it. Nobody knows these dudes. The NBA, or not the NBA, our USA team has the best NBA players in the world. So you can't tell me that the NBA players are the best athletes when a random group of dudes from another country can almost beat them in their own game, right? Because if Tom Brady came out of retirement and took a bunch of dudes out there, heck, even Patrick Mahomes, and they played against South Sudan in football, it would be a bloodbath. It would be a Georgia taking on TCU in the playoffs, or Georgia taking on Florida State last year. That's what it would look like, where people were like, did I turn this off, or how bad is this going to get? I mean, that's what... You can't tell me that these are the best athletes in the world. Why the hell are they almost losing to South Sudan then? Nothing against them. But when you have a small country against the best players in the world that you keep hearing, these are the best guys in the world. And then they almost lose to Germany with being a team led by two ex-Michigan guys that I don't want to sound negative to my boys, but the Wagner brothers, they're not top NBA guys, right? They're more of like journeyman guys. They should not be pushing LeBron to the brink where LeBron is flexing after making a layup to barely beat Germany and South Sudan. Like, what is wrong with you? He should have been crying after that. Like, I can't believe we're such an embarrassment. That's my final take. Don't argue with me and say that the basketballers are the best athletes in the world, because a bunch of random dudes from South Sudan just showed that they're not. If you watch Patrick Mahomes play against any other country, could you imagine them trying to tackle him? Just like throwing it up, or even going back to the year that Patriots went almost undefeated, or they went undefeated up till the Super Bowl, and you had it like a super team with Tom Brady and Randy Moss and them playing against like a bunch of dudes from like Germany, how bad that loss would be for them. That's why you can't compare them. Can't compare them. That's my final thing. Anything else you want to talk about?
I think you just hit the nail on the head with that, though. The dream team was so competitive and just absolutely destroyed everyone. And I feel like with the teams that are now in, it's like there's not that killer instinct that the basketball team used to have. It's like, well, we're here, and like there's good players, but they're not playing well together. So I feel like it's almost like the same issue that we have with the USA soccer coach. Like when it comes time for the World Cup, like we're able to attract high level talent and have great athletes, but like, why are you continuing to lay an egg on the worldwide stage?
Yeah, all it takes is like one lucky win. That's where like South Sudan, they weren't even undefeated, dude. They came in 3-2. They lost to Puerto Rico and Serbia. So it wasn't even like they're losing to like big countries that are known for basketball success. And they pushed the United States to the brink. I don't care how... If you're the best athletes, you shouldn't be able to be guarded by a ragtag group from another country. Like, these guys aren't playing together. Like, they're not like just going around like... Even the women's one. The WNBA All-Star team beat the Olympic picks. Caitlin Clark's team, right? I think Caitlin Clark was on the All-Star team. Why? Why are you putting a bunch of old players on this team that's going to be for the Olympics? You're like, we don't want any younger players. They might not be good. Back-to-back times they did this game. The WNBA All-Stars won. They had the same girl, the high scorer. She didn't get picked for the Olympics team again. Why? Why not? Right? I don't understand it. If she's better than the entire team and beating you in the All-Star game twice, let her play for her country. Like, she better have opted out. I forget who it was. But the same player was high scorer, I think, both games that the United States or the WNBA All-Stars beat the Olympic team. How do you think she feels? Because, like, you can't prove it any more than that. Unless there's an age limit and she's, like, 24 at this point. And they're like, next time we'll get you. Like, if that's what you want to do, that's fine. But then you better bring home the gold. Right? They said, like, oh, last time they didn't lose a game after this one. It's like, they shouldn't even have lost this one. The Olympics should be the best team. Point blank. That's all I have. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.